appreciate you being here today. We are now live. Remember to mute your mics if you're not speaking. And if you have trouble on the reception, you can always take out your video. That's helpful as well. So with no further input from me, I'll turn this over to South Face, to Megan, and to Mike Ford.
Yeah, Mike, you can go ahead and take it.
I will do. Thanks. Let me pull up my screen here. And I'm not hearing any cries, so I think you should be able to see my front page there. Today we are going to continue the conversation about efficiency. We're going to take some closer looks at the impact opportunities that we can find in Athens. And I can go through it pretty efficiently today and probably still lay on around the 3 o'clock. As you're all aware, these are the people who are involved in the Citizens Advisory Board. The topics we're looking at today, we're going to spend a little time kind of putting energy use in perspective in a couple of different ways, both in residential and commercial environments. We're going to take a look at some technologies that are going to help us meet that 100% goal down the road, and also slightly deeper dive. I don't think we covered that very closely last time. And I'll take a look at some examples of actual buildings that we've worked on, and the kind of benefits that you can get from some relatively simple upgrades and retrofits. And I think you'll be surprised. It's pretty interesting numbers that we're getting out of some of these buildings these days. Time permitting, we'll just have a few more things to mention about energy codes and kind of going above and beyond codes. We're not going to have time to talk about workforce development, but I just want to just remind you that just about every topic we touch today signals kind of a potential opportunity somewhere for workforce development. And that could be skilled trades, could be professional careers. So that really runs throughout these improvements that we're talking about. It's something that's a topic you can push farther down the road. Once you have more strategy and policies in place, but keep it in mind, because it's one of the benefits that rolls out of clean energy planning. So I'm going to start back with your scenes that we visited in the last session, and just get you back in perspective about how much power each of these types of plants produces. And this is, of course, the solar array there at UGA, which, if you recall, we had a chart last week that showed a bunch of different power plants around Georgia. This is not a particularly large solar array. It looks big, but and it may have to do with location, down in some of the military bases down in the southern part of the state. They have arrays that pump out 30 times as much energy as this one. This is a hydro plant near you, I think just north of you. This is Plant Vogel. And of course, this is Bowen coal plant, which is one of the last coal plants running here in Georgia, and it happens to be one of the largest in the country. So that's a major coal plant. And some numbers, how many single family homes? It's a good way to, something everybody can kind of understand. How many single family homes does one of these power? 650, 15,000 from the hydro plant. Vogel, 700K right now. Of course, you have this other reactor over here I think it's going to go online next year or whenever they say it's going to go online. And that's going to have a significant impact on how many homes they're powering there. But Bowen, running full tilt, can power 2.5 million single family homes. So it's just to get you back in the perspective of kind of the scale of the challenge here. Question? So let's go back down. We've talked about the big picture already. I want to talk about light bulbs, not necessarily, they're an important piece of the solution here, but it's also another Just another way to keep the scale in mind when we're talking about energy. You know, a light bulb is something we can all kind of relate to, but it is important. You know, this talk about low-hanging fruit. Of course, I don't know if everybody knew this, but you got your LED is kind of the newest and highly recommended technology. Compact fluorescent is another efficient, and this is your traditional incandescent. Not going to look at this whole chart right now, but there are a couple lines to look at when you compare. Now they're looking, first of all, this number 25,000 hours. Boy, that seems like a long time, and it is. I mean, that equates to running a light bulb at normal use every day for like 8 to 10 years. And the reality is, you know, that's lab conditions. They do say that an LED bulb can give you 25,000 hours of light. How long you leave it on, how often you flip it on and off, different conditions are going to change for 3 to 5 years. And you can expect more from a lot of them too. So, I mean, that's a money back guarantee on a lot of LED bulbs. But the important things to look at, I think, are how much electricity are you using? This is in order to reach 25,000 hours, that measuring stick that we're using, how much electricity are you burning? So you can see it's a significant difference. Of course, if you have, the more bulbs you have in a building, the bigger difference that's going to make. We're just talking about one bulb here. And the cost is another way to look at that. And that's based on a 10% per kilowatt hour, or 10 cents per kilowatt hour. I think folks in Georgia, we might be paying a little more than that, probably 12 or something. Then the total cost, just in dollars, is kind of a no-brainer. But it's important, you know, financially and environmentally, it makes sense to switch light bulbs. A lot of people still resist because they don't like the quality of light. They have in their minds that the quality of light is different. It's not as pleasing as your traditional incandescent bulbs. And that might have been true a number of years ago, but the technologies have come a long way, and the light is very nice now, and there's no reason to be afraid of these technologies. But I think this education piece for consumers and homeowners is important. That's an important thing for a community to look at, because there are too many choices when you go to the light bulb store now, and making the right choice, you know, that's where people also get frustrated. These things are expensive up front, and if you buy the wrong one, you're frustrated. So there's an education opportunity there. Now we're going to look at electrical use and the costs associated with it in a house. Of course, we just talked about the light bulbs, and they're going to have a couple of those in every one of these rooms. But still, at the end of the day, and this is important to keep in mind, is that in a home, the HVAC system, the air conditioning, the heating, ventilation is going to run typically up to 60% of that utility bill, sometimes more. 2/3, even 3/4 of it is not all that unusual in an old building. And to put that in perspective, a couple things about quickly, as far as other appliances in the house, your fridge, your dishwasher, your electric range, throw in your washing machine. That's if you're doing a couple loads a week. I calculated that. And your water heater, which is your second highest energy consumer in the building, but you still add all those up, and they're significantly less than what you're putting in 1080 kilowatt hours per month in your HVAC average. So, by the way, televisions, some of them are very high. You know, the bigger your screen, the more energy it's going to use. And there's a big difference between LCD and plasma these days. So anyway, look at that. Look at those numbers next time you're buying a TV. So it looks, you know, look at the fridge compared to the HVAC. It doesn't look like that big a deal, but it's still a potential big energy burner. And something important to keep in mind. So Energy Star, you're familiar with the label, you've seen it. When you go to buy a new appliance, that Energy Star label today actually only means that is 10% more efficient than the current minimum standards. So you're getting a little efficiency bump when you go to buy that new appliance. The most important part of that is that most homes don't have the minimum standard in the currently, if you have a 10, 20, 30-year-old appliance, you're going to get a much bigger boost when you get an Energy Star, or when you get, even if you just buy any new appliance that meets minimum standards. If you get Energy Star, you're getting an additional boost. I think this is important when you're thinking about that energy burden again. Families, you can look for that old refrigerator, that old stove that's really eating up a lot of electricity could make a difference in that house if they buy something that's new. Doesn't have to be top of the line energy efficient to meet, to make a significant difference. Interesting little facts to keep in mind. So how do you cut this HVAC cost? I think we talked a little bit about it last week. I want to point it out you're familiar, we saw this picture, the air leaking in or air leaking out, air leaking in. I want to reiterate, though, that to cut those HVAC costs, this goes for all kinds of buildings, that air sealing is top of the line. Air sealing and duct leakage would be second, would be top line items to address. And I'm going to kind of bounce around. I'm going to keep mentioning weatherization today. And whenever we talk about that, it is referring to residential setting. Remember, the residential single family homes or low rise condos and so forth. Weatherization, that term is applied in the residential setting usually. Commercial, kind of a different ballgame. So when we do a weatherization program or package in a house, we're looking at that air and duct leakage. We're looking to tune and maintain the HVAC system that's there and only replace it. We'll talk about when you'd want to replace that a little bit more in a minute, but obviously if it's too old and it's not doing the job. You're also using weatherization techniques. You're going to address drainage, moisture, and humidity issues, which are going to affect building performance, as we talked about in a number of ways that humidity can make a big difference. And weatherization agencies also look at low cost efficiency like low flow plumbing and the light bulbs and your ballasts and so on. So it's looking for the cheapest, quickest solutions is really what weatherization is. And in the process of that, they're also going to look at combustion safety factors if you have combustion appliances, carbon monoxide, moisture, electrical wiring. Just look in the box, make sure it's at code, and then smoke and CO detectors. So there's the energy component, there's the health and comfort component. And I'm going to show you some pretty impressive numbers actually later when we come back to weatherization about some other benefits that come out of this besides just the reduced energy burden. I'm talking about benefits for the family living in that house. So that's how you address the HVAC, that 60% cost through weatherization is the first step and hopefully not have to replace it. So let's get into the technologies a little bit here. And starting with some basic information about that HVAC system. This is when people say, oh, I have an old system, this is probably what it looks like. If your house was built in the 80s or 90s, you probably have something sort of like this sitting out there. Probably a 10 SEER. SEER is just stands for Seasonal Energy Efficiency Rating. It's what we recommend, it's just the standard one way to measure efficiency of these machines. So this is average. I don't know, this is really a national average sort of thing, but about $2,800 a year to run this 10 SEER machine. So if you have that and you go to buy a new one today in Georgia, the base minimum standard in Georgia, you can't install anything under a 14 SEER. So even if you buy the cheapest thing off the shelf, you're going to get, generally, you'll look to get about a 40% efficiency boost between the 10 and the new 14 SEER. And the cost to install that's going to be about $3,000 or $4,000. But the savings, the net that you should get out of installing something like that compared to what you were paying with that 10 SEER is about $700 a year, average. If you want to go bigger and look at a 20 SEER, that would be kind of the, getting pretty fancy. The upfront cost is significant. It's about $8,200 for this 5-ton 20 SEER. But your savings, your annual savings, again, compared to this 10 SEER, go way up. And this thing over its lifespan, whoever's running it, whoever's living in that building is going to actually net you a positive return compared to what you would have been paying. $5,000. So a couple of points here. One is that utilities, actually, I think, I know Jackson, for one, I'm sure the other ones do offer incentives for homeowners to upgrade that will help take maybe $500 out of that install costs. There could be other rebates out there. There are similar rebates in the commercial sector too, but that's an area of kind of policy and public relations to look at, whether you can entice utilities to offer better incentives. And we'll try to talk about that a little bit more later too. I think I have another slide that touches on that. But that's to put it in context. And by the way, south face, typically when somebody asks a typical homeowner, what should I put in? We recommend go for a 16 SEER, that little extra boost of efficiency. That's just the south face recommendation. And people often ask, is this going to help my home value? And not necessarily, but what a new HVAC system does definitely makes it more appealing to your buyers. I want to touch on mini splits real quick also, which is another way to condition the air in your house. Some of you may be familiar with these now. They've been around a few years. It's ductless. So you still have an outside unit. This is your inside unit in a room. It provides both heating and cooling. It provides fresh air. Has a longer lifespan and is more efficient than that typical HVAC we were just looking at. Mostly more energy efficient, I should say. It depends on what size HVAC system you get. And it's a nice bonus as the occupant comfort is because this really allows you to adjust the temperature in the room where you are. Whereas that thermostat is really for the whole space. For your HVAC system, if you're spending a lot of time in one room, you can control the temperature, but there's trade-offs, and there's trade-offs in everything we're talking about. And one trade-off, and we're going to talk about ventilation in a minute, but these are part of a well-rounded ventilation system. They do not, a mini split in and of itself isn't exhausting air the way the HVAC system is. So you need other systems in there to assure that you have the right ventilation. And I will not explain that in too much detail, but I'll give you some resources if you want to know more in a moment. And again, these aren't suitable in every home necessarily. But it's an option for the future, and it's going to help pave the way for that renewable, 100% clean and renewable future that we're aiming for. Because we need electrical systems, highly efficient electrical systems. We're going to be powering things with renewable energy. Really quickly, also just to put what's the difference between residential and commercial, and where are your impact opportunities in commercial. So we don't call it we call these in commercial sector, these are chillers. They're going to be using chillers. And the big difference is a chiller is moving water. It's operating more like a refrigerator. It's moving fluid, it's moving water through fan coils instead of air. Your home HVAC system's pumping in air. It's got an air handler, a chiller, these things you see on the roofs of commercial buildings, pumping water. Much different scale, could be 50 or 100 times bigger in terms of the amount of air that they're conditioning and the amount of energy that they need to do that. Interesting note that HVAC tends to be only about 40% of a commercial building's utility bill. But if they have a bunch of chillers up there, it's not always clear. It takes a lot of energy to pump all that water. It's a lot of water going through these systems, and the pump is a separate system that's pumping the water. So whether that's calculated into that 40% is not always clear. And another note, so if you have a big building, you may need, you have water-cooled chillers, and you also have cooling towers, which are another way to remove heat from the space. We try to recommend against them when possible. We also recommend against water-cooled chillers. There may be some efficiency advantages there, but they're really for like highly qualified maintenance people. They require a lot of maintenance. And if you don't maintain them well, you can get real health hazards like Legionnaire's disease. There was a breakout in an Atlanta hotel, not last year, the year before. It's serious. So we also kind of recommend against those when possible. Some buildings, you don't have a choice. I just want to give you a little perspective here. Anybody have a question? I heard something, or I saw some chat pop up. Okay.
We're just adding some comments.
Okay. So that's about commercial. Now I want to skipping back. Sorry, I kind of skipping topic to topic, but remember these are all systems in a building and they all work together. We're going to go back to ventilation, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time getting into this because it's interesting to a lot of people, and a lot of people are concerned about ventilation, always have been, and certainly the virus has brought that conversation to the forefront a lot more. And we all know, there are real health consequences, asthma, all kinds of chronic conditions that can be affected by the air quality in a home or office. So I'm just going to name a couple of things and that we talk about a lot in this world of energy efficiency. First is an ERV, an energy recovery ventilation unit. And quick, what this is doing is this air is being exhausted from the space, conditioned air, heated air, for example, being exhausted. There's I won't call it magic, but there's stuff that happens that doesn't actually cross with the incoming air directly, but there's a transfer of energy. There's an exchange. So some of that warmth, that heated air that's going out, it's going to transfer some of its energy to the cool air coming in, so that when that cool air then goes into the furnace or whatever is going to heat it for the home, it's already kind of reduces the load on your HVAC system. And you can do this is cold air, hot air, and they also have the effect of dehumidifying in the summer, because that dry air going out is going to cross with the humid air coming in, and they help humidify in the winter, which is what you want. So that's recommend for homeowners as part of a well-rounded ventilation system in commercial as well. And it is required by the energy code in certain commercial buildings if they're moving a certain amount of air, a pretty big amount of air. So you're going to be required by law to have it in a big building where you're moving a lot of air, but we're going to recommend it. Another topic of conversation, anybody heard about bipolar ionization? This is something that does effectively remove even viruses from the air, because it basically, through scientific magic, it makes kind of clump together, and therefore they're easier to filter. And this is great. You can also make the room more pleasant. And this is something you can literally kind of plug into your existing HVAC system. I've heard anywhere from $500 to $1,000 for a home. But the catch is it only works when your blower is running. And that's the same with an ERV. These things aren't doing anything if your HVAC system's not on. And you don't want to run your HVAC system all the time, or you're going to start paying bills, So that's a catch that people don't realize. And to make this conversation short, we recommend a dedicated outdoor air system called a DOS at South. I won't even get into that. I will point you to this paper that we have, one of our technical principals, Mike Barsley, put together last year. And it's just a white paper, but really this is coming from somebody with 25 years experience of experimenting with every technology and strategy out there. Perfect type of ventilation system in a home. And you can also do this in the commercial space too. But this paper, 10 pages, I could talk about it for an hour, or you could go read it. It's totally not like a science journal. It's meant to be practical. So we'll make sure you get that link if you're interested. Because everybody should kind of, if you're going to talk ventilation, you got to have kind of that basic background knowledge from that. So from ventilation, let's talk about other elements of the indoor environment that is going to have an effect on energy efficiency, any well-being and health. And because there are a lot of studies that have confirmed that natural light really boosts well-being and therefore productivity. A lot of businesses have done these studies because they want to make sure they're getting the most out of their employees. And it turns out natural light's great. Windows help. Windows have their own issues. You can't have windows everywhere. So this technology has come a long way. It's pretty amazing these days. When I walk into a room and I see a solar tube, the effect that it's having, I mean, this is a side by side before and after of a room where you probably couldn't put a window if you wanted one. And this is the light from the solar tubes coming in. It looks like a couple fluorescent light bulbs up there on the ceiling. It's relatively non-invasive procedure to put this in to a house, and you can actually run it. You can run it through the floor to the first floor if you need to. As opposed to a skylight, a skylight is just basically a window on your roof, which is probably going to have leak issues and create all kinds of other problems. But these solar tubes have all kinds of mirrors and reflecting devices in them, so that it doesn't matter if it's a cloudy day. It could be a rainy day, and you're still going to have sufficient light coming through that solar tube. So relatively low cost, pretty cool, lots of benefits, something else to consider. Quickly about water heat, some fun facts here. Your two basic options, well, you have three basic options if you include solar. Solar water heat still getting some mixed reviews as far as its efficiency or effectiveness. So not to steer people away from it, that's more of a supplemental than a primary right now. But you've got gas and you've got electric. If you got to go gas, we say go ahead and keep that gas. One good reason to keep that gas water heater is because you're actually, if you're the 1 unit of gas that you use in your gas water heater, if you compare that to your electric water heater, if it's pulling off the grid, and Georgia, as we know, is about 50% of our energy is coming from natural gas, you're actually going to burn 3 times as much natural gas at the power plant to heat the water in this electric one as you would burn if you're doing it at the source. So that's one thing to consider. Caveat, trade-off. Not all buildings are suitable for natural gas. You got to have it. You can't have it, even though you see them sometimes. You can't have that thing in your house. It's got to be in the garage or in what we call a combustion closet, or it's a fire hazard and a health hazard. So not all buildings can accommodate gas. Electric is more efficient, though. It is a more efficient and cost-effective way to heat water. So despite what I just said about natural gas, when it comes to efficiency, we're recommending electric these days. Not only because it's more efficient and safer, but also because this is how we prepare for the future. Our 100% clean energy future doesn't include natural gas water heaters, because natural gas is not clean energy. It's just cleaner. So the more electric you put in, the more prepared you'll be for that 100% energy and the other renewables come along. So this is one of the ways you pave the road for the future. And quickly, tankless is the latest, greatest thing. We certainly recommend it. It's more efficient and it's more expensive also up front. But again, it's going to be even more energy efficient, and it's come a long way. Mike Ward and I had a little conversation about this yesterday, and if you did this 10 or 20 years ago, you were probably disappointed with what you paid for in your tankless on-demand water heater. But it's come a long way. It's much better now. So, and just real quickly, we're going to talk about transportation someday in one of these sessions, but just a reminder that electric vehicles do impact your utility bill. They impact utility load. You're pulling off the grid. So it costs about 11 cents to charge, or $2.64 to reach full charge. This is according to EPA stats I was reading. Of course, that's going to vary. I'm sure Tesla's probably better. I don't know. But it's about equivalent to running your central air conditioner for 6 hours to charge, get a full charge on an electric vehicle battery these days. So it's just one of these things to consider as we go forward. This will impact utility bills and electric use. And that's, everybody expects public entities, businesses to put chargers outside as if, it's not like plugging in, can I borrow your outlet to charge my cell phone? It's a significant cost that somebody has to pay for. And I guess the car owner would be the first choice, but putting in that infrastructure and so on is a consideration. Just something to keep in mind. So that's about all I had to say about buildings this week and about the systems in buildings. To remind you, a lot of technologies that can help us meet the goals, but you can't forget just the basic, the bread and butter still comes back to that building envelope, air sealing, the weatherization. Then comes the technology, and then comes making the right choice about the technology, and not just saying, well, my brother-in-law said I should get this system. Well, there could be trade-offs depending on your building. So water waste, let's get back to this. Remember, this all ties into energy. This isn't just about conserving water. So we remind you about the energy water nexus, and that all these fossil fuel sources consume water in the process of making electricity. And total for the US is 320 billion gallons of water is consumed per year across the US for nuclear power generation. I know somebody at Southface could tell us how much Vogel specifically consumes, but it is water intensive. And it just so happens, if you were to add up all that water flowing through the middle of Coney River every year, it's about 27 million gallons. 27 million gallons a day. You multiply that out, it's about 32 years worth of the Coney River that we are consuming in water each year to generate nuclear power electricity. So, but away from the power plants, what about consumers? What about buildings? People are probably familiar these days with low flow faucets and toilets, so I won't show you any pictures of those, but those are things that are very important and very effective for reducing. We're going to look at some real numbers later when we look at those building stats I told you about, but people who water their lawns and gardens ought to consider rain barrels. There's commercial scale and there's residential scale. This water, it's great for outdoor water uses. User habits, it's just it's an education piece when it comes to water conservation. And I think most folks on this call are probably familiar with the basics of that, like not leaving the water running while you're brushing your teeth. And so that education has to be, needs to be reinforced again and again, and with each new generation of people. Another thing to keep in mind, and there's not necessarily a lot you can do about this, but as an individual, but and beer and chickens are not the only culprits here. Just about everything we buy, really, not just food stuff either. Products of all kinds involve some water in the process. Beer, I think the number we came to is 10 gallons of water for a glass of beer. And chickens, to process this chicken into its next stage in the journey to the supermarket, is about 7 to 10 gallons of water too. And that's something that's relevant in North Georgia. Chicken farms, are there efficiencies to be found there? That's a rural thing. That's a rural issue you might consider exploring. But the point is that water use is everywhere in places well beyond the faucets and showers and so on. This brings us to a topic that we want to touch on quickly today, related to water. And it's a cool topic. A lot of people enjoy it. I'm going to go through it quickly, though, for time considerations. Green infrastructure is a set of practices that revolve first around stormwater management and pollution control. You have a place that gets flooded a lot. You may be familiar with a French drain. There's a vertical tube that's actually and has holes in it so it can collect the water and take and redistribute it away from this flooding area. If you have that low-lying part in your yard or whatever. Different kinds of pavement, pervious concrete. This sidewalk, instead of the water just washing off it, as it will in most paved surfaces. This can actually absorb water, and this style of putting brick pavers in, they don't. If you don't pack them with mortar in between, and you put the right kind of soil mix underneath, sand and whatnot underneath it, it can absorb a lot of water rather than have it wash off. And that's the key in infrastructure, is that it's trying to treat what we call the first flush. The first half inch or inch of a rainstorm is going to pick up all the whatever was in the parking lots and on the streets and sidewalks and rooftops. That's pollution that's been sitting there. It's going to wash it all directly into the water stream. So into the water, wherever, into the river, wherever the stormwater drains are going. So you get this problem in a lot of cities, in particular, where that water is just going straight into that storm drain and out into the river. And the first flush is the most polluted, that first inch. So these things, this is a bioswale, which you may see in, you may recognize this kind of thing in parking lots. You see them a lot. That parking lot's designed for all that water to go into there and to treat it. That's not just a bunch of plants there. That's is a recipe for the soil underneath that, down several feet, different layers of materials that are going to absorb more water and treat that water before it gets back into the environment. Rain garden, same thing. And that's green roofs are another example of green infrastructure, which also treats stormwater, but has all these other also get from green infrastructure, which helps to treat the urban heat island effect, which even in Athens, you have a heat island effect, because the more pavement you have, the more heat you're going to retain during the day, and the warmer it's going to be at night. A green roof also insulates the building, gives people a nice place to hang out, and then it improves the efficiency of mechanical equipment because it's insulating the building. And so these are things to talk about. It's a topic actually that was listed in the surveys a lot of people are interested in, and it's related then to the urban canopy. This is Atlanta, known as the city in the forest. Is a major city. It has the highest percentage in the country of trees. About 48% of the area of Atlanta is covered in trees. The most trees are in New York, but Atlanta has that 48%, and Athens is right up there with Atlanta, about 48%, I think. Athens also has an ordinance around the tree canopy. It strives to maintain a canopy of about 45% or more. And we had a little discussion about it. We could talk more about it in a later session, but you got a lot of trees in Athens. Now, the next question is, are they the right kind of trees? Are they doing what we want trees to do? So, and then, of course, there's the issue of, well, trees take a long time to grow. And if a big tree like this goes down, and this tree, I got to just say, I know we're short on time, but in my research on Athens, I discovered this tree. I have a tree that owns itself in Athens. Is everybody aware of this? The tree at the corner of Deering and Finley Street, which some Colonel so-and-so back in the 1800s loved the tree so much that he deeded the land underneath it to the tree. The tree died in 1942. It fell and was replanted by a civic group. One of the acorns from that tree was replanted here. So that's what's growing here now since 1942 in that same spot. I thought that was like one of the coolest tree stories I've ever heard. That tree owns itself. That makes it pretty unique. So I like talking about green stuff. I kind of steered off course a little bit, but it is all connected still to this built environment. And remember that tree canopy, I didn't even mention this, that it has a measurable effect on the temperature inside of the buildings. And that includes even large buildings. If you're cooling the bottom floor, it's going to have a measurable impact on that. So that's why it ties into energy efficiency. Quickly, trash. Trash is part of this solution here toward clean, or managing trash, I should say, is part of the solution towards 100% clean and renewable energy. It takes a lot of energy just to move the trash around. Garbage trucks, all the equipment in the landfills, not to mention the whole process of manufacturing, distributing, and then throwing away all the plastics and other stuff that we use. Huge carbon footprint. Plus, landfills have, they release methane, which is bad for the environment. Now, I understand that Athens, like a lot of landfills, captures that methane and repurposes it and makes energy out of it. That's terrific. So that kind of treats that problem, but you still have, it'd still be nice. Not everything that goes in that landfill is going to decay and create methane. Like these plastics going to be there for hundreds of years. So that's what we're looking at the importance of when we tie waste management to energy efficiency. It's because of the carbon footprint through the whole cycle of our consumer habits. Fact here is that this is EPA. I don't know why it's doing it by itself, but this is the EPA stats on how much trash goes into landfills each year. And it just took a mind of its own. But about 50% of it is compostable. Paper, wood, yard trimmings, and food. 21% of what goes into our landfills is compostable. It's food. And all of that, about 50%, could be composted. And a lot of the rest of it could be recycled. All those plastics and the metals. So how do you manage that? It's a big issue. It's something approach. And I know Athens already has. You have commercial building recycling ordinance. They're required to have some kind of recycling system in any commercial building. How effective is it? It's almost impossible to really enforce. You don't have recycling police out there. So it's just something else to consider. And really it all comes down to education and practice and community infrastructure. You have the industries in place that can take all these plastics and make sure they get recycled. And a lot of these things are very, most of your typical municipal recycling operation doesn't take all 7 types of plastic. So educating people, figuring that out, how to get this stuff recycled in an efficient way, because you don't want to be trucking it halfway around the world. So it can get a little complicated, but the communication is key. And it's key really at the point of when people are throwing stuff away, helping them make that best choice. People don't want to go too far out of their way to recycle a bottle. When it comes to composting, just real quick, this is something else for the cab just to keep in mind. And there's opportunities here. This ties into the local food movement, reducing the carbon footprint of where our food comes from and supporting local agriculture and supporting community gardens. That's when communities start looking at reducing food waste, they need to start looking at community composting and where the opportunities are for that. And these are just different scales from your backyard to your community garden, urban farm here in New York City. And then you have we have a couple in Georgia, actually, I think, large scale composting operations. Of course, you got to truck all the stuff there. So the less you're trucking the waste around to the composting, the better. But that's an issue. There's some great groups working on that these days. The ILSR, which put together this kind of odd-looking graphic, which I don't want to spend too much time on, but this is basically showing us how to turn all that food waste, 21% of what we throw, into much less trash. And it starts with not throwing away so much, like just buy what you eat, that kind of thing, and then not throwing away stuff that's still edible, and on down from there. But there's a lot of good programs out there working on that. And I'm going to go about a few minutes over, but we're going to go through these quickly. I think you'll enjoy some of these examples. These are South Face projects. These are all commercial buildings. They happen to be with our Good Use program, which supports nonprofits, provides through our generous partners funding for upgrades and various. And so I'm going to show you some examples. This is from the Atlanta Day Shelter for Women. Over here, it's showing you they're reducing electrical costs by 29%, gas 34%, water 24%. What did they do? They put in programmable thermostats, low flow faucets, better washing machines, timers, and better practices like turning off your computer monitors. That's what they had to do to hit these numbers. That is low-hanging fruit. This little dance company, I like this example because it's just a 7,300 square foot building, so it's kind of a typical size building. Sealing the building gaps. They did upgrade their HVAC system, put in some rain barrels, bathroom fixtures, high efficiency water fountains where you can fill up your water bottle, those kinds of things, and motion sensor lights, occupancy sensors, big numbers. So these agencies, these nonprofit organizations are able to take these savings and roll them directly into their programs or roll them into further efficiency upgrades, which we promote, of course. But those are real numbers. These are the things that dance company put in. This is programmable thermostat, rain barrels, updated their ductwork. Another example, Big Brothers Big Sisters. This is kind of an example of where you get into some higher end upgrades, but this is what they were spending on energy every year at this old building. And they didn't do anything major at this one really, except for the HVAC system. They looked at alternative transportation for people. They put in policies and practices is a lot of what made their impact. And 54%, 76 grand total on utility costs. Salvation Army, this is the last one. They did put in some solar, and that global plasma, that's that bipolar whatnot I was talking about earlier. That's one of those systems that they did put in, ventilation system. They did a little more, but they got a big impact out of that. So that was the commercial side. And I told you I'd tell you some numbers. I think these are important. Besides that, and when you look at weatherization on the residential side, the benefits you get, these are real numbers coming out of the Department of Energy after decades of these weatherization programs. In addition to lowering people's utility bills and making the homes more comfortable, because they have a healthier home, they don't have as many medical problems. And so the typical average family is going to save $500 on out-of-pocket medical expenses every year and get, be earning money as well. Every dollar you invest in weatherization is going to pay back $2.78, according to the DOE, in terms of the jobs that it brings and other environmental impacts that you're going to get. So we're at 3:00. I have a couple more slides. Unless somebody says otherwise, I'll keep talking. And those who have to go, no hard feelings. Just have a couple more points to go through. One more resource I want to show you. We talked about energy codes again last week, and just remember, energy codes impact new construction and additions and major renovations. In South Face, just as a matter of principle, we're always going to try to not tear down and demolish and rebuild a building. You always want to either figure out a way to reuse it, renovate it. But at any rate, Georgia energy codes, as of 2020, are going to bring your building up to a pretty high standard. The typical that's for new construction, basically. For existing buildings, the typical sequence of events when a city goes for a clean energy plan, you want to set some kind of benchmarking standards and encourage commercial buildings to benchmark. And an ordinance, well, that's a law, and that involves politics. It's not the easiest thing, but usually a city is going to start with, hey, we're just going to make sure our municipal buildings do the benchmarking. Then we'll do large commercial, then small commercial buildings. And through incentives and ordinances and offsetting strategies, which we don't have time to talk about today, once you start that benchmarking, then you can look at, hey, you didn't hit the minimum benchmark that we required. So you need to get an energy audit, come up with a plan to improve your building, and we'll check back on progress. That's kind of the way the laws and regulations work in cities where they try to put a little law behind it. On the residential side, you don't need the ordinances, but you need other government assistance and sort of public programs like weatherization and assistance programs, or the WAPs as we call them, and education and outreach, and of course those incentives we talked about, which can come from utility, they can come from local government organizations, and they can even come from businesses. Some way to incentivize people to get weatherization in their homes or to find assistance to do that. So you keep the commercial approach and the residential approach separate. And so when we say ordinance, we're not talking about forcing people to benchmark their homes. It's commercial only. And usually, well, we won't get into that. I do want to point you, if you want to know more about energy codes, these are the best resources Southface can offer you. Aside from reading these the codes themselves, these field guides are meant for use by inspectors and tradespeople, and they go through every component of the house or commercial building. That's the way the energy codes are laid out, and gives you great visual. They're very full of visuals, graphic heavy, to show you where the air sealing points are and all these other things. If you want to know how the energy codes work, these are on our website under our resources section. We have a whole section on Georgia Energy Code resources. The field guides can provide great education. I won't talk about green certification today, but except to say that outside of these rather strict green certification programs, about 90% of buildings, I mean, I mentioned in an earlier session, will never probably qualify or be motivated to go for green certification, especially existing buildings. There are other programs out there, such as Southface has one called BIT, which is more flexible and just a little more do it on your own budget, do it on your own time sort of approach that basically is a self-guided way to achieve better performance in a building. So there are other options out there besides LEED and so on for those the majority of existing buildings. That's it.
Okay, well, Mike, we did have a couple of questions that came up.
So fast.
One of them was about chillers. Are today's chillers quieter because they are pretty loud? The old style certainly were. So are today's chillers a little quieter?
That's a Mike Barsick. Okay, well, I'll get back to you. But you know,
really.
they're not designed to be replaced every 7 to 10 years. Like, they last a long time if you maintain them right. So that's why they look so old.
The new chillers are just as loud as the old ones.
Okay. The second question that came, or the second thing that came up was heating up your water, preheating your water using heat pumps. That we might want to make sure we don't leave that out of presentations as well.
Yeah, heat pump water heater is good. Is another, about supplementing like with your regular heat pump. I don't know about that, but there's something called a heat pump water heater. The big drawback is that they are very loud as well. And people have them, you have to tuck them way down. So, you know, that'll change, you know,
They're not that loud
in the future.
They're maybe like a refrigerator. I pretty much put them in all the houses we do these days.
The heat pump water heater? Yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty much the only thing we put in houses for heating water, and it doesn't take that much. I mean, you don't want it in your living room, but it's really no louder than a refrigerator.
Huh. Okay, well, that, you know, that is good to know. That's not what I had heard recently. Cool. I guess the problem could be then if you just, down to where you put it in the house, I guess. But and you find those to be you choose those because of the efficiency?
Yeah, they use about 1/3 of the energy of a standard electric water heater.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they're by far the best option.
Yeah, and that the noise thing, I'm gonna have to talk to my technical guy about. He complained about the noise. Sounds like there's a conversation to be had there. Thank you.
So are there any other pressing questions from anybody at this point? The one thing that we will ask, we don't want the discussion to stop here. Just a reminder that what we will be doing is breaking down these educational modules and making them more public friendly and public centric, and using them and getting them up on the web over time. So we're beginning to work on that. So it's really important to get your feedback and your thoughts from that perspective. We're also considering breaking them up into smaller segments so they're not one long presentation, but rather more topic centric, with that in mind. So we again, your feedback and thoughts is welcome. Remember to finish the survey. Also, any recommendations for reaching out into the rural community? I think that was a great suggestion. We're just trying to look for a mechanism to best do that. We do have the schools to help us promote information there, but there are people that don't have children any longer in schools. And if you're like me, whose children are out of school, you lose touch with a lot of that at the same time. So ways to get people involved in that direction. Please provide feedback, emails, and we will get back to you. I know that South Face is going to send out some of those link information, and that was referred to in Mike's presentation. So is there any, we have a CAB meeting in about 2 weeks, starting, I guess it is exactly 2 weeks, isn't it? At the same time, I will only send out one link notification this time. So again, my apologies for the confusion at the beginning. Any other questions or thoughts in last minutes? All righty. Well, thank you all for spending your time with us. We hope it was helpful, and we really appreciate your participation.
Thanks, guys. See ya.
Thank you.